Hi everybody. I have currently very little opportunity to do videos, but right now I have a few minutes, so I quickly took a few notes. What I would like to talk about briefly here is the concept of work in the Bible. God is a God who works. He does wonderful works, and He created the universe. That was His work. And in Genesis 2, verse 2, we read, "By the seventh day, God completed His work which He had done, and He rested on the seventh day from all His work which He had done." So God worked, He created, and then He rested. Adam and Eve, whom He had created, He created as creative beings as well. Their task was to give names to all the animals, and the position from which they worked was that they reigned over God's creation. And I can imagine in the cool of the day when they talked with God that He asked them, what animals did you give names to today, and why did you pick the name you did for such and such an animal? So it was a conversation between God, the Creator, and His created beings, Adam and Eve, who also were creative. But after the fall, things changed dramatically. The fellowship with God was broken, but Adam and Eve didn't stop to work. They still worked, but their motive was different now. They tried with their works to mend this broken relationship and to be able to approach God again. That was, however, not accepted by God. Adam and Eve sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings, but God did not accept those. He clothed them with garments of animal skin, and from the very beginning, it becomes very clear that restoration of fellowship with God must be God's work, and that which is necessary is a substitutionary atonement for the sin of man. And briefly after that, we see the same problem with Cain. He toiled and worked hard and presented to God the fruit of the ground as an offering. That was not accepted by God. Abel understood, however, that atonement must be made, and he presented to God the firstling of the flock, and his offering was accepted. Fast forward to the New Testament. In John 6, people ask Jesus, "What shall we do so that we may work the works of God?" Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in Him whom He has sent." Our quote-unquote work, in order to be accepted by God, is to believe in Jesus. We cannot work the works of God. Only God can. He is the provider of salvation. That is His work. We see that also clearly in Ephesians 2, verses 8 and 9, where it says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast." So, yes, salvation is never of works. Jesus, however, did work. Of course, He accomplished the work on the cross, but even before that, during His earthly ministry, He said, "My food is to do the will of Him who sent me and to accomplish His work." And He also said, "My Father is working until now, and I myself am working." So He did the work of His Father, and they were both working, and the Father was working through Him. On several occasions, Jesus did works on a Sabbath, the day of rest. Jesus Himself is the reality of the Sabbath, of rest, of course. One time He healed a sick man at the pool of Bethesda, and not only had He healed him on a Sabbath, He had also told him to pick up his bed and walk on a Sabbath, which wasn't allowed. So, yeah, Jesus worked from a position of rest, but the religious people did not understand this. They work in order to be accepted by God, and they do not know that rest comes with faith, and their work is done in unbelief and with a notion of meriting God's favor. So they back then wanted to kill him for his work done out of rest. Although Hebrews 4 verse 3 tells us that the works were already finished from the foundation of the world. So any works done as a believer, or also in Jesus's case, were works that were already finished, and they are done from a position of rest. But the religious people back then didn't understand it, nor do they today. They do not understand what rest really means and what working from a position of rest means and looks like. They have no idea, and it makes them furious, just as back then. And they start to persecute people who understand this and who do works from a position of rest. So, if works are not accepted to obtain salvation, what about works after salvation? Hebrews 4 verse 10 tells us, "For the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did from his." So it is not our works. We are to rest from our works after salvation. The story of Mary and Martha comes to mind here. Martha was very busy working for Jesus, and Mary just sat at his feet and listened to what he had to say. And Jesus said that Mary had chosen the good part, which would not be taken from her. He did not say to Martha that she had a good part as well. So he clearly commends Mary for focusing on him and taking in his word and listening to him. Now, that was only a scene in Mary's and Martha's life. So we do not know what happened later on in Mary's life. That which she had taken in from Jesus's message, she was very likely able to give to others and help others with. So, but she started with resting at his feet and listening to his words. In Ephesians 2 verse 10, it says, "For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." Now, this is very interesting here because the verb here is not do, it's not work either, but it's walk. The works are prepared beforehand already from the foundation of the world, as we have heard. And our task is simply to walk in them. That means as we go about our daily lives, with Jesus indwelling us, we just walk in whatever God has already prepared for us to walk in. It is not something we set out to do now. We get to work now and check the boxes, but we just walk in what God has already prepared anyway. Jesus had said, "But the Father who dwells in me does the works." In the same way Jesus dwells in us, and he does the works through us. Back to Mary, the Mary, sister of Martha. Jesus had told her that she had chosen the good part, and there was also the woman with the costly ointment of nard, who had anointed Jesus. And it's interesting because Jesus said to those who stood around and who complained, who said that that was a waste and that the ointment could have been sold and given the money given to the poor. But Jesus said, "She has done a good work upon me." I find this very interesting, what Jesus calls a good work here. Those who stood by clearly would not have called this a good work. As I said, they called it a waste. So they have not eyes to see what a good work really is. And Jesus's criteria for good works are very different from those that religious people have. So I find this very comforting for a believer who is bedridden, for example, and cannot do the classical good works, whatever the concept of those is in a religious person's mind. But Jesus views this very differently, and regarding this act of worship of this woman who had given her everything, he said that this was a good work upon him. So anybody who believes on Jesus can do this and just worship him with his or her whole being and be at rest, because that is what Jesus calls a good work. Now, of course, there are good works in the classical sense. In Titus 3 verse 8, it says that a believer should be careful to maintain good works. And it does say these things are good and profitable to men. And it's very interesting here to note that an unbeliever, we also find that in Titus in verse 16 here, is called reprobate and unfit for any good work. So by nature, an unbeliever cannot do good works, but only a believer can. And if he does, yes, they are good and profitable to men. But note that Jesus said to this woman with the ointment that she had done a good work upon him. So yes, there are works that are profitable to men. As we walk our daily walk, as we live our lives, they come naturally. We just walk in them what God has prepared. The way we act, the way we react is just an expression of what we are in Christ and what he is through us. And yes, the Bible calls those good works, and others profit from it. And an unbeliever, who many would say does a lot of good works, is in the Bible described as somebody who cannot even do that, because again, God's criteria are very different. They have to do with an expression of Jesus through a believer. So just to sum this up a little bit, works of a believer are to be walked in, not to be done or worked. They come out of a position of rest, just as Jesus worked on a Sabbath. The Father worked through Jesus, and Jesus works through us. And works aren't really meant for men, but they're centered on Jesus. And this is a byproduct that men profit from them. And works may not be presented to God as a wage earned. It's neither the quality. Cain might have thought, wow, I am presenting here the best fruit or the biggest fruit of the ground, nor is it the quantity. We see that in the offering of the widow. For others, it was nothing, but for her, it was all she had. And this is exactly how God viewed it. Nor is it the time spent or the years spent in quote-unquote ministry. We see that in the parable of the workers in the vineyard. The ones who had worked the whole day thought they had earned way more wages than those who had only started to work an hour before the end of the day, at the end of the workday. But this was not the case. God gave equal to everyone, and we cannot put him in our debt. It is all of grace. So, yeah, I hope this has given you some fresh insight into the concept of work in the Bible. and I wish you a blessed day.